Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome to our deep dive, everyone. Today we're tackling affirmative action.
Yeah, policy that's, aimed at giving a boost to those groups that have faced barriers in education and jobs.
Exactly. We're going to dig into how it worked, the pushback it got, and especially what it meant for Hispanic Americans.
And what's really interesting is that affirmative action wasn't just about, shifting numbers around.
Right.
It was about trying to right the wrongs of centuries of discrimination.
Like leveling the playing field.
Yeah, exactly. Like almost like you're trying to climb a ladder, but some of the rungs are missing.
That's a great analogy.
Affirmative action was about trying to put those rungs back in so everyone has a chance.
I like that. So let's set the stage. We're talking about the 60s and 70s, right?
Right.
A time of huge social change.
Right.
This is when affirmative action really took off.
Yeah, think about the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Huge.
Yeah, outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, you name it. And that was huge. It laid the groundwork
Yeah.
for a fair system.
Right.
And then in 1965, there was Executive Order 11146, which actually said federal contractors have to take affirmative action to make sure everyone has equal opportunity.
So those were big moments, but how did they actually translate into real change for Hispanic Americans? Did it really level the playing field?
Well, by the late 1980s, we see a big jump in Hispanic students in colleges and universities.
So it's working.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about getting into college.
Right.
Affirmative action helped to create a pipeline of talented people who could then give back to their communities, gave them a sense of hope,
Yeah.
Showed them that they could aim for higher education and succeed professionally.
So it's about possibilities, not just numbers.
Exactly.
But this is also when the pushback started, right? People started questioning if affirmative action was actually fair.
Yeah, you're right. The 1990s saw this growing opposition. Some felt like affirmative action was a form of reverse discrimination.
Okay.
That it was actually hurting white Americans. Others argued that it went against meritocracy,
Like people should succeed based on their own merit, not their background.
Exactly.
So did these concerns actually have an impact? Did they roll back affirmative action?
They did. Proposition 209 in California passed in 1996 and basically banned affirmative action in state institutions. And then a similar thing, Initiative 200, happened in Washington state in 1998.
So a domino effect.
Yeah. And we saw the consequences right away, especially in higher ed. Like in 1998, offers to minority students at UC Berkeley dropped a crazy 61% from the year before.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a huge shift.
So we see this tension building, right, between fixing past wrongs and being fair in the present.
Right.
A real dilemma.
It is. And historians have really grappled with this question.
Right.
They've looked at affirmative action from all these different angles.
Let's dive into those different viewpoints then. I'm really curious to hear how historians have made sense of this complicated part of American history.
So one perspective is often called the progressive view, and it emphasizes the need to really dismantle systemic racism, no matter the downsides. Like Juan Gonzalez, the author of Harvest of Empire.
Right.
He argues that affirmative action, even if it wasn't perfect, was crucial to breaking down those barriers. He's less concerned with individual cases where it might seem unfair and more focused on the bigger goal of reaching true equality.
So taking a long view, understanding that real equality might mean things are a little uneven for a while, what other perspectives are there?
Another is called social history, and it focuses on how affirmative action really empowered communities. Scholars like Vicky Ruiz, they highlight how it spurred activism and political involvement within Latino communities, gave them a bigger voice.
So it's not just about individuals moving up, but whole communities rising.
Exactly.
Fascinating how one policy can have such a big ripple effect.
Absolutely. Now, critical race theory scholars like Eduardo Bonilla-Silva, they see the backlash against affirmative action differently. They see it as a sign of racism that never went away, a resistance to really sharing power.
I see.
In fact, some of the campaigns against Proposition 209, even though they said they were for colorblind equality, actually used language that played on racial fears.
So they're saying those claims of reverse discrimination might be hiding a deeper resistance to equality.
Yeah.
That's thought-provoking.
Right.
Is there a view that focuses more on the economics of it all?
Yeah, the economic determinist school of thought, guys like William Julius Wilson, they emphasize the economic benefits that affirmative action brought to minorities. They say it clearly helped, but also acknowledge that it's vulnerable to shifts in politics.
So it's helped, but it's not a guaranteed thing.
Right.
So we've got these 4 different interpretations, each shedding light on different parts of affirmative action.
Yeah.
Sounds like there's no easy answer to whether it was a success or a failure.
Exactly. And that's why primary sources are so important. By looking at the actual documents and materials from back then,
Ooh, I love getting into the nitty-gritty.
we can hear those voices from the past, grapple with how complicated this history really is in a more personal way.
So what kind of primary sources do we have to work with? Give me the good stuff.
Well, we've got the Civil Rights Act of 1964 itself.
Okay.
That's like the legal foundation for affirmative action.
Right.
It clearly says that we need to take action to fight discrimination.
Yeah.
It reminds us of the context where these policies came from.
It's like the cornerstone, the thing that set everything in motion.
Right. And then we have campaign materials from Proposition 209,
Okay.
which show us the arguments of the anti-affirmative action movement. They often talked about fairness and equality, but sometimes those arguments kind of ignored the very inequalities that affirmative action was trying to fix.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how language gets used to frame these complex issues in such specific ways.
It's like we're time travelers eavesdropping on the people who shaped this whole debate.
Yeah, and then we have something really powerful. The University of California admissions stats from 1998, the year after Proposition 209 went into effect. These numbers show us the immediate and dramatic impact of getting rid of affirmative action. Offers to minority students just plummeted at top schools like UC Berkeley.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that policy changes have real consequences.
We're real people.
Yeah, impacting their lives and opportunities.
These sources really do bring history to life. They show how these abstract debates actually play out in the real world.
Right, that's the power of primary sources. They ground us in the reality of the past and help us see how complicated these issues are beyond the slogans and sound bites.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. The origins of affirmative action, how it affected Hispanic Americans, the backlash, and even different interpretations of its history. But the big question remains, was affirmative action successful?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And like a lot of things in history, there's no easy answer.
Yeah, it really is a complex question. I mean, on the one hand, we see the numbers, the more students in college, the more diverse workplaces. But what was it like for the people who benefited from affirmative action? Was it all good, or was it more complicated than that?
It was definitely a mix of things. You know, imagine being the first in your family to go to college, a place your parents never thought they'd see. That's powerful, right? It shows that doors are opening. But some people felt this pressure to prove themselves.
Yeah, like they had to show they weren't there just because of a policy.
Right. And for some, it was frustrating. Like, people might not see their achievements as their own just because of affirmative action.
Like they always have to work harder to prove they're really talented and capable.
Exactly. It's a lot to carry.
It makes me think of a time when, actually, you know what? Maybe not the best time to share that story, but it shows that even policies with good intentions can have these unexpected consequences. You know, they affect people's lives in ways we don't always see.
That's so true. We have to listen to the people who are actually affected by these policies, hear all the different experiences, the good and the bad. It's not just about numbers, it's about real people dealing with these complicated feelings.
Absolutely. So zooming out a bit, where does affirmative action stand today? Is it still a big issue?
Oh, definitely. The debate is still going strong. People on both sides feel very strongly. Those who support it say it's still needed to make things fair.
Okay.
They point out that there's still inequality in education, jobs, even wealth.
So even with the progress we've made, we're not there yet.
Right. They say that without affirmative action, those gaps will just stay there and we'll miss out on the potential of all the different people in our society.
So it's about the future, too. Not just fixing the past, but creating a better future for everyone.
Exactly. And they also talk about how important diversity is.
Right.
You know, diverse schools mean richer learning experiences. Diverse workplaces are more creative and innovative. It's about seeing that all those different backgrounds and experiences actually make us stronger as a society.
It's like the more the merrier, but for ideas and cultures.
Right. It's not just about fairness. It's about making the most of what we have as a society.
I like that. And supporters of affirmative action also point out how it creates a pipeline of talented people from groups that haven't always had the same opportunities.
Exactly.
They say these people can then become role models and mentors, inspiring others to break down barriers.
Right. It's about creating a cycle of opportunity, opening doors that were closed before, and then helping others do the same.
So powerful. But what about the other side? What do the people who are against affirmative action say?
Well, they often say that it's reverse discrimination. That it's unfair to people from majority groups who might be just as qualified or even more so.
So they're worried that in trying to fix one injustice, we might create a new one.
That's their perspective. They believe that people should be judged only on what they can do and what they've achieved, not on their background.
So a level playing field based on merit alone.
Right. They think that's the only way to be truly fair.
I can see how that argument would make sense to people who feel like they're being judged for things they can't control. What other concerns do they have?
They also say that affirmative action goes against meritocracy, that it lowers standards and rewards people for who they are, not what they've done.
Okay.
They're worried that it devalues hard work and individual effort.
Makes sense.
Creating a system where people succeed not because they're the best, but because of the group they belong to.
So it's about making sure that success comes from individual merit, not from outside factors.
Yeah.
Sounds like a really fundamental disagreement about how to get to true equality.
It is. And they also worry that affirmative action might actually make stereotypes and divisions worse.
Okay.
Highlighting differences instead of what we have in common.
Instead of bringing people together, they're afraid it might push them further apart.
Right. It's kind of a paradox. A policy that's supposed to promote equality might end up creating new inequalities.
That is a paradox. It's like this reminder that even in a society that wants equality, there are deep disagreements about how to get there.
Exactly.
And those disagreements often come down to different ideas about values, fairness, the role of government.
Yeah.
You mentioned Sonia Sotomayor earlier, and her story seems really relevant here.
Oh, absolutely. Sonia Sotomayor's journey to the Supreme Court is always coming up in these discussions about affirmative action.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about her story and how it fits into this whole complicated picture.
So Sonia Sotomayor, the first Hispanic and third woman on the Supreme Court, has an amazing story. She grew up in a working-class family in the Bronx, New York City. Lots of challenges.
Sounds like she had to overcome a lot from the very beginning.
But she was so smart and determined. She did great in school and set her sights on college. Ended up getting into Princeton, one of the top universities in the country.
Wow, that's a huge achievement. And I understand that affirmative action played a part in that.
Yes. Sotomayor herself has said that affirmative action helped her get into Princeton. You have to remember, back then, Princeton was mostly white and wealthy. Affirmative action was meant to change that, to make the student body more diverse.
It's amazing to think that that one decision, that chance to go to Princeton, had such a big impact on her life and led her to the highest court in the land.
Exactly. She was exposed to new ideas. She was challenged intellectually. She met people who were influential. It gave her the foundation and the tools to reach her full potential.
But isn't there also an argument that she succeeded because of her own hard work and talent? That even without affirmative action, she would have achieved great things?
That's a good point. And it comes up a lot in these discussions about affirmative action. Does it give too much credit to the policy and not enough to the individual's own efforts and abilities?
It's a tough question. It's like the chicken and the egg. Did affirmative action create her success, or would she have been successful anyway because of who she is?
It is tough to say. And it gets to the heart of this whole debate about affirmative action. How do we recognize that there are systemic barriers that need to be addressed, while also celebrating individual achievements and making sure that merit is rewarded?
It sounds like it's about understanding how individual choices and larger systems work together.
Exactly. And Sonia Sotomayor's story shows us how complicated that is. She's talked about how affirmative action helped her, but she's also made it clear that she got where she is through hard work and determination.
So she embodies both sides of the argument.
Right. Her story shows us both the promise and the challenges of affirmative action, the doors it opens and the questions it raises.
It reminds us that these aren't just abstract debates. They're about real people with real stories, navigating complex systems and trying to build a better future for themselves and their communities.
Absolutely. And those stories, those different voices are so important for understanding this ongoing debate about affirmative action and for finding solutions that create a more just and equal society for everyone.
Yeah, it's clear that Sonia Sotomayor's story is just one of many. It's a reminder that behind all the stats and the policy debates, there are real people whose lives are really shaped by affirmative action.
Yeah, for sure. And those individual experiences, those different points of view, they're so important to understanding what affirmative action really means. We can't just look at the numbers. We need to hear the voices, the stories of success and struggle, the hopes and fears of the people who live through this complicated part of American history.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I'm wondering, what do you think are the biggest questions we still need to think about when it comes to affirmative action? What's still unresolved?
Well, one of the toughest challenges is figuring out how to balance righting past wrongs with making sure everyone's treated equally. How do we level the playing field without creating new kinds of inequality? It's a tough one, and there's no easy answer.
Yeah, like trying to solve this equation with all these different moving parts.
Exactly. And another big question is, how do we know if affirmative action is actually working? Are these programs really reaching their goals? Are there side effects we need to deal with? It's not enough to just start programs. We have to keep checking if they're having the right impact and make changes if we need to.
So being smart about it, looking at the data, and being willing to adapt, what else are we still trying to figure out?
There's also the debate about whether affirmative action should be a temporary thing or a permanent thing. Some people say it's necessary, but just for a while to even things out. Others say it needs to be there all the time to address the inequalities that keep coming up.
So it comes down to how we see those systemic barriers.
Exactly. And it's a debate that's probably going to keep going for a long time. But one thing's for sure, we need to keep talking about it thoughtfully and respectfully as we try to build a society that's more just and fair.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive on affirmative action. We've gone through its history, how it affected Hispanic Americans, all the controversies and the questions that are still out there. I hope everyone listening feels like they can keep learning about this important and complicated topic.
Me too. And remember, history isn't something stuck in the past. It's alive, and it's a story we're all part of writing. The story of affirmative action is still being written, and we all have a role to play in what happens next.
That's a powerful thought. So to everyone listening, as you go out there into the world, stay curious, stay engaged, keep asking the tough questions, and most importantly, use what you've learned to make a difference.
Because in the end, it's not just about understanding history. It's about using that understanding to create a better future for ourselves and for everyone who comes after us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.